The insane popularity of compact SUVs just doesn't seem to show signs of slowing down, and it's not hard to see why. At this price, they have just about everything you want from a family car, and everybody wants a piece of the pie. In fact, Mahindra wants two pieces of the pie. As you probably know, they already have a compact SUV called the XUV300, and now there's this, the XUV300. It's a baby sibling to the XUV500, and Mahindra says it's quite different from what the TUV offers. Now, some of you may already know this, but the XUV300 originated from the SsangYong Tivoli. The Tivoli was thoroughly re-engineered to make the XUV300. For one, the length has been shaped from 4.2 meters to 3.9 meters, and though there is a resemblance, almost all the body panels are new. It also uses Mahindra's own engines and suspension, so really, while the base platform is the same, it's pretty much a new car. So what do we think about the way it looks then? The detailing at the front with the chrome-studded grille, the projector headlamps, the vertical LED DRLs that extend down to the front bumper, it all looks very classy. At the back too, the part LED tail lamps give it a distinct signature, the tailgate is nicely sculpted and it has a nice visual width. Viewed in profile, I like the contrast roof, especially on this color of car, and the 17-inch alloy wheels too. But unfortunately, the proportions are a bit off from this angle. Now let's step inside and see what they've managed with the interiors. The interior of the XUV300 is a bit of a mixed bag for me. On one hand, the design is pretty straightforward, and for the most part, the dashboard at least is really high quality. These buttons, for instance, they're very well damped, and even the ones on the steering wheel feel really premium. In fact, the steering wheel itself feels really nice to hold. On the other hand, there are far too many colors, textures and materials on this dashboard, and it looks like a bit of a mishmash. And while the top half here looks nice and modern with its 7-inch touchscreen, the bottom half looks like it came from 10 years ago. Some of the plastics lower down in the cabin aren't as good as, say, the dashboard, but that aside, there's plenty to like too. There are loads of cubby holes for storage. I like the big bright dials whose backlit colors you can change like the Maruti Brezzas. I like the informative trip and fuel computer that even tells you if you've left your wheels turned before you set off. And I also like that the front seats are well bolstered at the sides. But the really impressive bit about the XUV300 is its vast equipment list, which I'm going to try and list out for you right now. Most of the equipment is up there with the best in the segment, and there are even a few segment firsts. The safety kit on board is worth talking about too. Not only do you get a rear view camera and rear parking sensors, but also front parking sensors. Plus disc brakes at all 4 wheels and a class-leading 7 airbags. And of course, Mahindra tells us it meets all current and upcoming Indian crash test norms. An interesting feature of the back seat of the XUV300 is that it has adjustable headrests and 3-point seat belts for all 3 passengers, and that's quite cool. The bench is reasonably comfortable and there is enough space, although it's not the class best. The driver's seat is set to my position and I'm about 5'8", so yes, there is a bit of wiggle room, but if you had 2 6-footers back to back, they'd be a little bit tight on space, I think. But you have to realize that for all this car's features, one thing it doesn't have is a rear AC vent. Before we start driving though, we should take a look at the boot, as it isn't one of this car's strong points. Mahindra didn't reveal an official figure, but it's clear that it's significantly smaller than what most rivals offer. There's also a very high loading lip, meaning you'll have to haul your bags up and over to load them in. Now it's time to get going. Let's see what this Indo-Korean partnership feels like out on the road. The XUV300 is powered by the same 1.5-litre diesel engine as the Mahindra Marazzo, but it's been tuned slightly differently for this car. The good thing is, despite the retune, it maintains some really healthy power and torque figures. 115 horsepower and 300 Newton meters of torque, which is insane for a car of this size. In fact, both those numbers are class leading for diesel engines in sub 4-meter SUVs. It's made it to a 6-speed manual gearbox, which is really light to use, and so is the clutch, which makes light work of shifting around in traffic. Not that you'll find yourself shifting gears too often in town, because this compact SUV has a very strong torque reserve at the bottom end. Mahindra says they've worked really hard to contain turbo lag, and they have. There is very little of it. However, there's just so much torque that when it comes on boost, this car just leaps forward and you have to prepare yourself for that. For instance, I'm going to put it in third gear, let it dip below 1500 RPM, floor the throttle, and when it wakes up close to 2000, it just goes and goes. Wow. You really have to be gentle with the throttle if you don't want to go flying into the car in front of you, and performance feels properly strong. This thing is really quick. It's really quick. Mahindra hasn't claimed a 0 to 100 time, but I can't wait to strap it to our testing gear because honestly I think it will deliver some really impressive numbers. If there's a criticism to this powertrain, it's that the power band isn't very wide. Its grunt is focused at the bottom end and it's all done by around 4000 RPM. It also felt quite refined, but again that's something I'd like to test against our equipment and against its rivals. Another commendable feature on this compact SUV is engine stop-start, which will save you a lot of fuel every time you stop at traffic lights. However, in practice this takes a bit of getting used to because the system is not perfect. What I'm going to do now to demonstrate is pull over to the side and put the car in neutral, which should shut the engine off. But it hasn't. Now it's off. And I tend to set off in a hurry from a set of traffic lights, but when you do that, the engine hasn't started up in time. So you will stall it and you have to start it up again. So I guess it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's not perfect. See what I mean? Now you should know that there will also be a 1.2 litre turbocharged petrol engine with 110 horsepower and 200 Newton meters, but Mahindra didn't have this car for us to test at this event. The XUV300 rides pretty decently as well. It's set up a little bit on the firm side, but it's not uncomfortably so. Bump absorption in general is quite good, and unless it's a really big crater or steep speed breaker, the XUV300 takes it all in its stride. But what does hurt things a little bit are the 17-inch alloy wheels. They do ride on 55 profile tires, but you can feel a bit of bumpiness over a rough road. And all this got me wondering, since Mahindra has the TUV to handle the rough off-tarmac situations, maybe this XUV300 is more geared to the tarmac and to corners. And for that, I got to sample another cool feature, variable steering. While some rivals do offer driving modes that alter the engine performance, this one has driving modes but only for the steering, which is quite interesting. If you're pottering around town, comfort makes things really light and easy. But if you're out on open road like I am right now, prefer to put it into sport, which gives you a bit more heft and confidence. So far so good, but let's see if I can give it a bit of a shakedown. So I've brought it to a slightly windy section of road to see what it handles like, and I have to say I'm pretty impressed by the amount of body control there is. It doesn't roll too much, which is nice, but the steering doesn't really inspire that much confidence. Even in its sport setting, it still feels a little too light, and while it's sharp and quick, it just doesn't give you enough feedback from the road. Mahindra was right when they said the XUV300 takes a different approach to the compact SUV formula than its sibling the TUV300. But I wasn't prepared for just how different it would be. I also wasn't prepared for just how capable this car would be. The strong diesel engine gives it serious performance, the cabin is for the most part very well put together, it's got a reasonably spacious passenger cell, and the ride and handling balance is very good too. And to top it off, the XUV300 delivers what's easily the segment best equipment and safety list. At the time of filming, the prices have not been revealed, and while I'm sure they'll be competitive, I suspect this top-end version will be a little on the expensive side. After a series of impressive new cars like the Marazzo and Alturas, Mahindra seems to have kept the streak going with the XUV300, which is sure to make a big impact in this small SUV segment. Things have been rather quiet over at Nissan India in the last couple of years, and they haven't had an all-new launch in quite some time. But that's all changed in 2019 with the introduction of this, the Kicks. Now when we first drove it, we found it to be quite a strong product. But then it would have to be a strong product because it's just joined one of the toughest segments on the market. mid-size SUVs. And that's why we've brought along what we think are two of its fiercest competitors. Its own alliance cousin, the Renault Captur, and the darling of the sales charts, the Hyundai Creta. As first impressions go, the Kicks makes a very strong one. It's the longest of the three and also looks larger in the metal than you might think, with a generous 210mm of ground clearance lending it a strong stance. The design deftly mixes crossover and SUV proportions, and elements like the snout-like nose, contrast roof and gently raked tail work really well. The Captur has a very European look to it too, but the decidedly crossover-like design hasn't caught the fancy of Indian buyers. In fact, the Captur's biggest weakness in India is that it simply doesn't look SUV enough. Still, you can't deny that it has loads of road presence. With its relatively boxy shape and upright stance, it's the Creta that conforms closest to the traditional SUV shape. However, while the Creta is the tallest, it is the shortest in length, and at 190mm sits closest to the ground. It doesn't quite have the visual mass of its rivals. Time to step inside. Open the Kicks' doors and instead of the dull and drab greys we're used to from Nissan, what you'll find is a cabin that's premium and inviting. There are quilted leather seats, a freestanding 8-inch touchscreen, and a swathe of leather across the dash that adds greatly to the premium feel. Even things like the part digital instruments are nicely executed. However, many of the plastics look low rent, and then there are ergonomic issues too. The front seats are set a bit too high, the footwell is narrow and lacks a dead pedal, and the fixed center armrest fouls with your arm when you use the handbrake. The Captur's cabin has the same shortcomings as its Japanese cousin, with the added issue of inadequate in-cabin storage and cubbyholes. And frankly, the cabin's hard and scratchy plastics are not in keeping with the SUV's price. It does have its interesting elements though. The front seats are plush, the dash is neatly laid out, and the butterfly look instrument console with its digital speedometer is unique too. Everything is a lot more conventional inside the Creta. Sure, the dashboard is looking a bit dated now, but everything is within easy reach. There's no shortage of storage space and it's logically laid out. It's well finished too, with the most consistent plastic quality. Front seat comfort and visibility are also good, and as an added advantage, the Creta with its upright A-pillars also give drivers that all-important feeling of piloting an SUV. Now, over to the back. Now, as you can probably tell, there's quite a lot of space in the back seat of the Nissan Kicks. Granted, I'm not the tallest person, I'm only 5'8", and the driver's seat is set to my position, but there's still plenty enough room for you to stretch out. However, I do believe they could have squeezed a little bit more space out of this size of car. That said, there's a lot to like here. I like the quilted leather, I like the brown shade, which is better than the passe beige, and I like that you get a good view out. The only thing that I'm not too sure about is the cushioning of these seats, which feels a tad firm. Now, as you might imagine, the back seat of the Renault Captur is quite similar to that of the Nissan Kicks. You get a similar seating position and a similar amount of room. They've even got their own take on the quilted leather upholstery. I do like the fact that the cabin is lit entirely by LEDs, and this rear quarter glass behind me does let in a little bit more light, which is nice. However, I don't like the fact that the door pads are almost entirely hard plastic, which just doesn't give you a good feel when you rest your arm on it, and the door pockets are woefully tiny. Now, amazingly, despite having the smallest exterior dimensions, it is the Hyundai Creta's backseat that is by far the most spacious, and arguably the most comfortable as well, with cushioning that's just a little bit softer. It also feels nicer thanks to more soft touch materials wherever you make contact, and it's less of a step up from the road into the cabin in case your passengers are elderly. It's not all perfect though, as it does have a very high window line which does make you feel hemmed in, and that's only exacerbated by the all black color scheme in the cabin. In the battle of the infotainment systems, it's a close fight between the Kicks' 8-inch touchscreen and the Creta's 7-inch unit. The Nissan system is slick and has sharper, higher resolution graphics but catches reflections. The Creta's unit is not as high res, and though it's easy to navigate, it doesn't feel as modern and cutting edge as the Kicks' one. Captur buyers will be disappointed to learn the 7-inch touchscreen doesn't come bundled with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, although we hear that will be incorporated sometime soon. The Kicks gets a segment-first 360-degree parking camera, while the Creta is the only one to get an auto-dimming mirror, a powered driver's seat, a sunroof, wireless phone charging, and now even cooled front seats. However, it misses out on LED headlamps, auto lights and auto wipers, which you do get on the Kicks and Captur. In terms of safety kit, all three SUVs come with ABS, ESC and Hill Start Assist. The top spec Creta goes one up on its rivals with 6 airbags, while the Kicks and Captur feature 4 each. This 1.5-litre K9K engine is something we've been familiar with for a long time thanks to Renault and Nissan in India. It makes 110 horsepower, and in this car it's made it to a 6-speed manual gearbox. There is a bit of lag before 2000 RPM and you have to learn to drive your way around that, but it can be quite annoying in the city. Luckily, the gear shift action is at least quite positive and the clutch is not too heavy. Once you get this motor in its stride though, it really feels strong enough and it's especially effective out on the highway. What I also like about the Nissan Kicks is the sense of security and solidity you get from behind the wheel. The car always feels really planted, especially at high speeds, and the steering feels weighty and gives you a good amount of confidence. And then there's the ride. It just feels rock solid. It does really well at absorbing bumps at low speeds or high, and it doesn't really get phased much. You and your passengers will barely realize it inside the cabin. The weighty steering and the sorted chassis also give you a lot of confidence to push this car hard around corners, and that's only a good thing. It's not entirely surprising that the experience from behind the wheel of the Renault Captur is really quite similar to that of the Kicks. One of the things that is familiar is the driving position, and I'm not entirely sure that's a good thing. You see, you are perched quite high up, like you might expect in an SUV, but some might find it a little bit too high, and that's because of the low sloping roofline. I'm quite short, but taller passengers I've known to be quite close to the roof when driving this car, even at its lowest seat setting. But the Captur also inherits a lot of the Kicks' strengths, like the engine and chassis, which are pretty much exactly the same. One area where the Captur does seem to have a slight edge over the Kicks, however, is in the suspension. At lower speeds it does feel a little bit firmer, but as you start to pick up the pace, it seems to absorb bumps even better than the Nissan does, which is really saying something. The other thing that's quite prominent in both these cars, and a little bit more so in this Renault, is steering shock. When you go over bumps mid-corner, it kicks the steering back in your hands, and that can be a bit unsettling on our roads when you're trying to go fast. Now, we're no strangers to the Hyundai Creta over here at Autocar India. With 128 horsepower from a 1.6-litre diesel engine, this is easily the most powerful car in this test. But the thing about the Creta is how it delivers that power. It's smooth and linear with a much wider power band. There is of course some turbo lag here too, but it's not as pronounced as it is in the other two cars. What also helps is that the clutch and the gear shift action are significantly lighter than either of those two cars. They aren't too bad on their own, but this is just like butter. The downsides to the Creta come in the dynamics department, where it feels more like a jacked up hatchback than it does an all-out SUV. In and around town it's just fine. You get a nice light steering which makes it easier to maneuver, and the ride is soft and good at taking low speed bumps. But the moment you pick up the pace, you realize that this light steering lacks a lot of feel, doesn't give you a lot of confidence, and that the really soft suspension makes you bounce around a lot. So, who comes out on top then? The Captur is a solidly engineered product that feels built for India. What also works in its favor is its price tag. Even in top spec Platin form, it costs 13.25 lakh rupees ex-showroom, which makes it great value for money. However, it falls short on cabin quality and it isn't the most convenient SUV to drive in town. And then, there's a subjective issue of the Captur's looks. The Kicks easily goes one up on the Captur with a more likable design, and with its better finished cabin and longer feature set, it also feels the more premium. Yet it's every bit as rugged, making for a more wholesome package. This top spec XV Premium option pack is pricier, but you also get a whole lot more for your money. But good as it is, the Kicks has a few rough edges and lacks the overall plushness and refinement of the Creta. And like the Renault, Nissan doesn't have the strongest of dealer networks. If your daily route comprises bombed out roads or long distances, the Kicks would be the right choice. But let's face it, most mid-size SUVs are mainly city-bound with only occasional out-of-town drives. And that's where the Creta noses ahead. It is the easiest to drive, the nicest on the inside, the roomiest, and also the best equipped. There's no denying that at 15.62 lakh rupees, the Creta SX optional is expensive, but with multiple variants on offer, you'll surely be able to find one in your budget. It might not be the perfect SUV as Hyundai calls it, but for the average buyer, the updated Creta is the best option out there.